Picking up the story in 16, the people who were encamped heard it. Zimri conspired to strike down the king, Israel, and therefore Israel made Omri, the commander of the army, king. You should hear when Israel made them, it meant their army made them. So as the general in charge, or the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, he became the next king. His first act as king was to break off the battle with the Philistines at Gibeton and go and start a battle against his own clan at Tirzah. There are two things he had to do. One is keep watch on the Philistines, because they would be smart if they turned around and went after them while they were divided. Fortunately, news didn't flow like it does today. The Philistines didn't know why the battle was broken off. But they go up to Tirzah, and the commentary on why Omri does this is because Zimri had taken the city and that he had become evil in the sight of the Lord. Don't let that make you think, therefore, Omri will do better. He might not. But really why he did it was, nobody made that guy king, and he killed my king, and I'm out here working for a king, and you killed him. So you're dead. Now, let's pick up the story at 21. Then the people of Israel were divided into two parts. Half the people followed Tibni, the son of Ginat, to make him king. The other half followed Omri. But the people who followed Omri prevailed over the people who followed Tibni, son of Ginat. And Tibni died, and Omri became king. We don't know if Tibni was just simply another commander, which is what it appears to be, but it appears as though trying to be king over Israel is now a dangerous pursuit. One of the fastest ways to end your life is make a career change and run for king. Okay? So Tibni passes in and out of the biblical narrative of Tibni never made it. That's it. False start. Now let's move to Omri. And it says that the people who followed Omri prevailed. Verse 23. In the 31st year of Asa, king of Judah, Omri became king over Israel and reigned 12 years. He reigned 6 years at Tirzah. He bought the hill Samaria from Shemer for 2 talents of silver, and he built on the hill. And the name of the city he built, Samaria. He called it Samaria after the name of Shemer, the owner of the hill. Shomer is the word for guard or guardian. Samaria is like a guardianship. And by the way, I know I say this often, but it's one of the cool excavations is to see the work of the Omri dynasty at Samaria. It's a very cool set of buildings that's been uncovered archaeologically. Omri did evil in the sight of the Lord, acted more wickedly than all who were before him. I want you to mark that at 25. Sets a new low. The bar is going down, and we are limboing lower and lower. He walked in the way of Jeroboam, son of Nebat. What does that mean? Circle the word idols at the end of verse 26. He promoted idolatry, walked in idolatry, continued the idolatry of Jeroboam. And then you get a simple, now the rest of the acts of Omri, which he did, and his might, which he showed, are they not written in the book of Chronicles of the Kings of Israel? And you say, well, I'm sure they are, but I can't read them. And then you read verse 28. Omri slept with his fathers, and he was buried in Samaria. And Ahab, his son, became king in his place. So you get very little. But here's what you know. You know that just because what we may look like is successful, God doesn't rate success the way we do. He looks like he bought land, moved the capital yet again. So we've had Shechem, then Tirzah, now Samaria, and everybody's doing capital building. And isn't this wonderful? The guy looks powerful. He's 12 years between 885 and 874 or thereabouts on the throne, and he usurped the throne from Zimri, but he did evil in the sight of the Lord. And all we know about him was he was the commander of the army. He was appointed by the people. He struggled to get the place of king. He bought Samaria, and then he ended up doing evil in the sight of the Lord and goes down in flames. But his line doesn't end. And that sets up one of the most important sections of Israel's history. And that will be, when you think of 1 Kings 16, think of the rise of Ahab or Ahab and opposite him will be light. If he's darkness, opposite him will be light, and that will be Elijah. Okay? So what we've done is we've basically gone through a series of, the first 3 lines basically brought us through this period. Line 4 brings us here to the line of the Omri dynasty. And right in the middle of the Omri dynasty, in the middle of 16, you set up darkness and light. And what I'd like to do is spend a little time with 2 aspects of what goes on here. One of them is King Ahab, because you should know something about him and Jezebel. But the other one is knowing something about what God did to answer the darkness of Ahab. It may come about that God raises up onto the throne of your own country one who brings such a level of darkness that no one before him could even believe what he was doing. And when that happens, there'll be people who are shocked by what happens. But God answers the problem by raising up a voice who is a voice of revelation, a voice of God's view of the news. And that will be Eliyahu or Elijah. By the way, on the street, if you had seen him, Eliyahu is his name. El is God, E, my God, Yahweh. My God is Jehovah, just in case you want to know. And that is the prophet. He rises out of some mysterious backgrounds. We'll get to him in just a minute. Let's deal first with what we have are basically vicious slaughters and 70 years since the division of the kingdom. We're now 70 years into the kingdom's dividing. And we've now gone to all the way to 3 different lines of come and gone, and we're in the 4th line or family line of what will eventually be 9 lines of kings. 1629. And what I'd like to do is pour through very quickly some of Ahab's story so I can get to Elijah's story, because actually 1 Kings spends more time on Elijah than it does on Ahab. Ahab is the window dressing for Elijah's ministry. Okay? So 1629. Now Ahab the son of Omri became king over Israel in the 38th year of Asa king of Judah, and Ahab the son of Omri reigned over Israel in Samaria 22 years. So what we get is he's got 22 years from 874 to about 853 BC. And Ahab, son of Omri, did evil in the sight of the Lord more than all who were before him. I would underline the more than all who were before him and then draw a line back to verse 25, because now the bar is going down from Omri. How low can you go? We just keep going down, 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 down. It's shocking that somebody can be worse. It says it came about as though it had been a trivial thing for him to walk in the sins of Jeroboam, son of Nebat. He married Jezebel, the daughter of Ethbaal, the king of the Sidonians, and went to serve God and worshiped him. I want you to notice that he brought a brazen administration, and there are 7 symptoms of what he brought. Let's pick out the 7 symptoms quickly. In verse 29, he brought pride in his national accomplishments. He reigned out of Samaria 22 years, and he endows it with the pride of the line of Omri. So he says, my daddy founded this city, and he makes it his capital. He builds national pride. Is national pride a bad thing? Yeah, it really depends on, I'm going to say something that a lot of my colleagues will disagree with. I believe national pride in and of itself is a bad thing. I think if you have national pride, it should be national humility for what God has given you. I am not proud to be an American. I'm humbled because of what God's given us. Because when I'm proud of being an American, that tends to be about us. When I'm humbled, it tends to be about Him. And I think that's important. I think we have to understand we're not smarter than the other people. The Chinese are pretty smart. The Japanese are pretty smart. Been with a lot of Germans, really smart people. I've found Africans to be incredibly innovative with very little. And all I'm saying is that national pride, to me, strikes of an egoism that isn't godly. But the second thing I notice is in verse 30. There's a phrase in verse 30 that sticks out, that he did more evil. That is, he increased the evil influences. You don't have to be the one who initiates it. You just have to be the one who fans the flame of evil, and God marks that on your account. So first, national pride. Second, he fans the flame of evil that had been done before. And he does it in in a profound way, he even lowers the bar yet again. But then in verse 31, did you notice the word he trivializes sin? Did you notice? It became, I circled the word in my text, trivial. It became a trivial thing. What's trivial mean? We use these words. What does it mean?
Little value.
It's just a slight thing. It's not even a big deal. Oh, it's no big deal. Do you know what I've seen happen in my lifetime? Divorce has become trivial. You're not even going to believe me, but I'm going to tell you anyway. There used to be a stigma. Now, it used to be something so weird that I think I had one kid in my elementary school years that had a divorced parent. One. How about you? And how about the kids in the daycare? See, what's happened is it's become a trivial thing. Now, the fruit of it are broken people all over. But everybody's going to skip past how they got broke, right? And we're going to focus on the people that are broken, not how we broke them. We're going to forget that it was basically selfishness of my generation that made yours pay. That's really what it is. Okay, let's go down to verse 31 in the second half. Not only did he make sin trivial, but he also openly defied God's stated rules for life. What is the open defiance in the middle of verse 31? Her God is Baal and her blood is foreign, and both of those are big-time no-nos. But look at the end. In verse 32, you even see, and the end of verse 31 and into 32, you start to see something. You see, this is the first king you're going to see that erects an altar himself and actively participates in the sinful practices. You haven't seen that since Jeroboam. Jeroboam started it, but man, this guy he's not just doing wrong, he's in it. I want you to feel what this looks like. If the next president declares himself to be Muslim, shuts down churches, opens up mosques, and is bowing down and calling us to prayer, that's what this looked like to their people. It looked like a total reversal. Now we've got foreigners coming in, pouring in with their priests, bringing something that wasn't from our God and wasn't from our tradition, and you've upped the ante. I need you to see that Ahab did something that nobody did before. You say, but they were idolaters. Yes, but that was an idolatry of calves that we knew from Aaron back in the Exodus. This is flat out Baalism. This is a different religion. He brought in foreigners and they piled on top, and all of a sudden this was a new and very divisive thing. And he also then went all the way back to the Canaanite practices of the Asherot. Remember, those are like those household gods, fertility goddesses. Some of the oldest dolls we have were probably fertility goddesses. And so the simple thing is he publicly participated. He privately dedicated himself to godless practices. The last one I have is in verse 34. Total public disregard for God's pronounced judgments. When God spoke, he left. Somebody could read the Bible and he'd go, pfft. Here's how he did it, verse 34. In those days, Hiel the Bethelite built Jericho. Wait a minute, whoa. What did we know about Jericho? Never build Jericho. You lay the foundations of the gates and I'll kill your firstborn. You finish the foundations of the walls and I'll take your children away. That's what God had told them back in Joshua. Don't you dare build up Jericho. So Joshua 2-6 tells the story of the taking of Jericho and leaves you with, it is a korban, that is mine, don't touch it. Hiel boldly goes in, and it says, he laid the foundations with the loss of Abiram, his firstborn, and set up its gates with the loss of his youngest, Segub. You've never met anybody whose career was more important than their children, and they would build their career even if it killed their kids, right? Then it says, according to the word of the Lord, which he spoke by Joshua, son of Nun. You know why that's an important phrase? It tells you that the word of God wasn't lost and that Joshua was part of the Bible and understood the words of Joshua to be the word of God. So when you're looking at the book of Joshua, you're looking at what the people at the time of 1 Kings 16 understood already to be God's word. It's not that a group of people under Constantine 300 years after Jesus decided what was the Bible. It's that all along people acknowledged that those things belonged in the Bible and the Bible was growing. God's word and a collection of it was known to be God's word already, authenticated by people. All right, when you get to that point, let me start you in seminary. I'd like to take you to the seminary of Elijah the prophet. And the first, in 17:1 through 7, I want to show you seminary class number 1. This is what I would call learning God's provision. Somebody read the first 7 verses.
Now Elijah the Tishbite, who was of the settlers of Gilead, said to Ahab, As the Lord, the God of Israel, lives, before whom I stand, surely there shall be neither dew nor rain these years, except by my word. The word of the Lord came to him, saying, Go away from here and turn eastward, and hide yourself by the brook Cherith, which is east of the Jordan. It shall be that you will drink of the brook, and I have commanded the ravens to provide for you there. So he went and did according to the word of the Lord, for he went and lived by the brook Cherith, which is east of the Jordan. The ravens brought him bread and meat in the morning, and bread and meat in the evening, and he would drink from the brook. It happened after a while that the brook dried up, because there was no rain in the land.
Okay. 2 things you want to know about Elijah. 1, God spends more time on his preparation than he does on his ministry. So the point is, this is the first highlighted prophet you're going to see where God develops exactly how he trained the prophet. Okay? Second, he's a weatherman. If you want to know anything about Elijah, it's the water goes on when I say, the water goes off when I say. Okay? So think of Elijah, think weather. It would help if you also knew this. The symbol for Baal, as I said to you earlier in the year, was a bull with a lightning bolt on top of it. Baal was a god of the weather. So when God was being challenged in Israel's history by a god of the weather, he sent a weatherman. That's what he did. And Elijah got up and said, it doesn't rain unless I say it rains. Baal. And that's what he was doing. He was taking what we saw in Exodus 6 through 12. God was more, the power of the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob was greater than the power of the gods of the Egyptians. Now we're going to see the power of the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob is stronger than the so-called God Baal or Baal. When you say Baal, Baal is actually his name. If you say Baal, it's fine. I'm not going to go, but just so you know, okay? All right, now here's what I want you to see. Class number 1, verses 1 through 7, Provision 101. What is the lesson of Provision 101? You go from where you are out to a brook and wait by the brook. Couple of features. Charit is actually the word a break. You deserve a break today. So get up and get away to charit. Charit means a break. Put it down because you're going to want to know what the words mean. It's going to be important to the story. God says, go to break time. Go sit by Break Time River and take a break. And I'm going to do something for you. I'm going to give you food. And where's the food coming from? What's that?
His birds, his creation. Like, I'm going to give it to you.
Instead of you feeding the birds bread, the birds are going to bring you bread. Okay? So it's the exact opposite of what you've seen in life, counterintuitive. But the ravens are unclean birds. I'm going to send you through unclean birds bread. Now, no doubt, somewhere, some lady was baking bread, sticking them out on the window to cool down, and ravens were instructed to go grab the bread, bring it over to the brook Harit, and drop it. The first day, I can understand. Eventually, I'm thinking there's some do-gooder out there feeding bread to birds, and the birds are dropping it on Elijah. Here's what I know. I can provide for you in ways you cannot see, do not understand, and would not look. I really think, honestly, if Becca came to me and said, I just want you to know that my life plan is I'm going to move to Montana and wait for the birds to bring me bread, we would get her counseling. Okay? So the idea that Elijah is just going to go out to the middle. Now, here's my favorite verse of verses 1 through 7. It's a great verse. I want you to zero in for a minute on verse 7. How did Elijah know? What was God's signal to Elijah that the class was about to change? The brook was drying up. In other words, Elijah was doing exactly what God told him to do. He was living off the provisions God promised him, and they started drying up. And by the way, it wasn't until there was no rain in the land and the brook dried up that God, in verse 8, then spoke again. What's the provision lesson? It's not just that God can provide through means you can't explain. It's that you are to stay where you are and wait for God's word to move when provisions don't appear to be coming. You don't plan it. Some of you are like me, you're planners. Guys, I know I'm neurotic, but I have planning days to plan my planning days. Over the holiday, one of my days was my planning day to plan my planning days for this year. I feel better when my planning days are planned, okay? And I haven't done my planning day, but I have a plan for my planning day. And if you're wondering what's wrong with me, you just aren't as godly. What can I tell you? No, I'm serious. Some of you are like that. You're kind of like, oh, I got to have a plan. Verse 8 smacks you in the face. Verse 7 says, shut up and sit there. If your instruction is shut up and sit there, you go, but wait a minute, it's not working. I'm doing everything I was doing yesterday, but the brook is getting smaller. God, do you not see? God, yoo-hoo, brook is drying up. Then the word of the Lord comes. Now we get to class number 2. Class number 2 is 8 through 16. Now I'm not going to read all the way through it. I'm just going to say that in verse 9, he is told to arise and go to Zarephath. Zarephath is the word for a smelting furnace. What do you know about a smelting furnace? What is a smelting furnace? Okay, somebody who's like watched Lord of the Rings or something? Okay. Is smelting is the process of taking ore and turning it into usable metals. And you do it by heating it up because different metals have different melting temperatures. And what you're trying to do is have all the dross come to the top and separate it out so that what's there is just the actual metal you want. So if it's gold, you want gold. If it's silver, you want silver. If it's brass or bronze, you mix the alloys and you get exactly what you're looking for. And the smelting is the process of fire that heats, that changes things. There's a whole backstory to the names of the places. The first place, all he had to do was lie there and wait for stuff to come. That was the break place. The second place is the smelting furnace. When you go to smelting furnace, expect things to get a little warm under the collar. And it belonged to the Sidonians. Okay, wait a minute. All you know about him so far is in 17:1 he has publicly challenged Baal. Guess who the god of Sidon is? Baal. Guess where Sidon is? The land from which Jezebel came. He is now riding into Jezebel territory. And he sits down at Zarephath, right? Now it says, stay there. Behold, I've commanded a widow there to provide for you. Now wait a minute. Once again, ravens are not where you'd think bread was coming from. And widows are not people you would think provision is coming from. Why?
They don't have a provider for themselves.
Yeah, they're looking for, typically in biblical times, they're struggling to make ends meet. I have a poor family for you to go live with. Whoop-de-doo. Verse 10. He arose, went to Zarephath, came to the gate of the city. Behold, there was a widow. Now, she is one of the happy people in Scripture. Just listen to her story. She's out there gathering sticks, and he called to her and said, please get me a little water in a jar that I may drink. And he says in verse 11, can you bring me a piece of bread in your hand? Why? Because he's looking for the person God told him was going to be there. Okay? Now, listen to her, Miss Happy, invite to the party for some real fun. She says, I have no bread, only a handful of flour in the bowl, little oil in a jar, and behold, I'm gathering a few sticks that I can go and prepare it for me and my son that we may eat it and die. Now, this is somebody you want to invite to your parties. This is a person with a deep, firm gift of discouragement, and she's sharing her gift. It's all bad. We're all going to die. This is my last meal. Now, Elijah is now in an unusual position. How does class number 1 in verses 1 through 7 help him in class number 2? What did he learn? God provides, and he'll do it in ways you don't know it's coming, and they're counterintuitive. So he rather boldly learns his second lesson, which is how to speak on God's behalf to people who aren't believing that God can do it. So lesson number 1 was really about provision, but lesson number 2 is really about him making clear that God can do things even when you don't think he can. And it's not just for her benefit, it's for his benefit. He benefits by being forced to tell her something that she's not ready to hear. Learning to speak to people who are resistant to what you're saying is a spiritual thing. Now, I love this story, by the way. I tell this story every time I go to Mount Carmel, and I absolutely, absolutely love the story. It says, Elijah says to her, "Don't fear. Do as you have said, but make me a little bread cake from it first and bring it out to me. And afterwards you can make one for yourself and for your son." He says, "Don't worry. You don't need to fear. It's not the end. Give me the first part." How many of you think, boy, that really takes chutzpah? I mean, that takes guts, right? Who's going to go, well, just give me my part first, and then you and your son, as you're dying, you can remember that you gave me mine first. And then he says, God told me something. "The bowl of flour shall not be exhausted, nor shall the jar of oil be empty until the day that the Lord sends rain on the face of the earth." Now, does that mean he miraculously fills it? Because in Sunday school, it's always this miraculous filling. Is that what he's saying? You remember back in Exodus, your sandals were never deteriorated? It doesn't necessarily mean God put them, gave them Teflon Dura sandal. What he's saying here is you're not going to run out. Could it be miraculous flour appearing in the jar? Yes, but does it have to be? No. It might mean that you're going to use the last of your jar, and then you're going to open your cupboard, and out's going to fall 2 silver pieces, and that's going to buy you everything you need from now till when the rain starts. Don't lock yourself into the miraculous oil coming up. It might be, but it doesn't have to be. God has lots of ways to do this, even ravens. Okay? Now it says, "So she went and did according to the word of Elijah, and she and he and her household ate for many days. The bowl of flour was not exhausted, nor did the jar of oil become empty, according to the word of the Lord, which he spoke through Elijah." I just want you to understand, I believe God could simply add flour where there wasn't any. But I also believe he could have had her run into money she didn't have. And that verse 16 only communicates the heart truth that God never let her down, not the mechanism of it. Because I hear people preaching and it's like, and God will create oil out of nothing. Well, he might give you a job. He might have given her a job. She might have been destitute and had no flour and oil because she had no work. But all of a sudden she gets a big contract to embroider something new. She does, and she never runs out of any money, and she always has food on her table. And verse 16 is still true if that's how it happened. We have a flannel graph story of the Bible in our mind, that things have to poof, when that's not what he's saying. Now, what do you take away from the second lesson? It's this. Sometimes God's going to put me in a position, Elijah would tell you, where people aren't going to want to hear what I have to say, and I'm going to have to hear from the word of the Lord, know his provision. I can't give out a message until I know it, so I needed cherit first. But after I had cherit, then I could walk right into the crucible of Zarephath when people don't like what I'm going to say and learn to say it out loud. Why is that important? Because he's not ready to stand up to Ahab until he's learned these lessons. I want you to try the small lessons before you take on the big ones. So what's the next lesson? Well, I'm glad you asked. It's in 17 to 24. And this test number 3, or lesson number 3, is this. Now it came about after these things that the son of the woman, the mistress of the house, became sick. And his sickness was so severe that there was no breath left in him. This is not a state you want to be found in. When you stop breathing, you turn blue. You don't look good blue. So he is now being utterly smurfized. He is lying there blue. Verse 18. She said to Elijah, "What do I have to do with you, O man of God? You've come to me to bring my iniquity to remembrance and to put my son to death." Uh-oh. Now you see it. There is a sin in the background of the life of this woman that we don't know, but God does. And immediately when something bad happens to her, out pops her mouth, "You did this because of my sin." We don't even know what it was. All we know is that it was there. We know that guilt followed her. Something was in her heart. And she, when she lost her son, ostensibly lost her son, cries out, "What do I have to do with you? You're God. You come walking in my house. You just did this because of that sin I did." Then verse 19. He said to her, "Give me your son." Then he took him from her bosom and carried him to the upper room where he was living and laid him on his own bed. And by the way, the upper room often gets called the prophet's chamber. It's an area where people, traveling itinerant prophets, would often stay on the roof and just build a shack on the roof. He called to the Lord and said, "Lord God, my God, have you also brought calamity to the widow with whom I am staying by causing her son to die?" He acknowledges she won't have any future. He says, "Is this from you? Did you do this?" He doesn't know where it came from. And his whole life up till now has been God doing things to tell him that he can provide. So his question is, did this calamity come from you? Did you do this? Verse 21, then he stretched himself upon the child 3 times and called to the Lord and said, "Oh Lord my God, I pray you, let this child's life return to him." He doesn't do it once, he does it 3 times. Don't make a big devotional word out of 3, Father, Son, and Spirit. Or don't go there. Here's what I want you to see. God didn't instantly answer his prayer. What is he learning? He's still in the school seminary class of provision. He's still learning from God. And so the Lord heard the voice of Elijah, and the life of the child returned to him and revived. Elijah took the child, brought him down from the upper room into the house, and gave the child to the mother. And Elijah said, "See, your son is alive." Then the woman said to Elijah, "Now I know that you are a man of God, and that the word of the Lord in your mouth is truth." Meaning that last time I didn't know that. In other words, let me open your eyes to this idea and see, you kick it around. If her flower just poofed into her cupboard, she would have assumed that this guy was like magical, right? But what if, when she opened her cupboard, some silver pieces fell out? Or what if, right after he came, someone came along and offered her an embroidery job? Could she not make the argument it was coincidence, not God? See, I think that's why I mentioned it to you. I think it looks like she's being resistant. I think it's really easy for us to go, yeah, that was just a coincidence. But wait a minute, dead coming to life? No, that's a God thing. I'm also wondering what her sin was and did she deal with it? But that just floats out there. You don't get to know that. All you know is that Elijah is going before God, but you see levels of learning. There's what the child learns. There's what the woman learns. There's what the prophet learns. There's what we learn from watching it. There's lots of learning here. Now, if those 3 lessons of chapter 17, the lesson in 1 through 7, the lesson in 8 through 16, the lesson in 17 through 24, are the preparation, then the message delivery comes in 4 scenes in 1 Kings 18. It happened after many days that the word of the Lord came to Elijah in the 3rd year, saying, "Go show yourself to Ahab, and I will send rain on the face of the earth." He says, "I want you to go see the king, and I'm going to turn the water on, because this famine is getting very severe." So Elijah went to show himself to Ahab. Notice that in verse 2, that's his purpose. And I want you to see that he's going to run into the first of 4 scenes in the chapter. The first scene, he's going to run into a fellow by the name of Obadiah. Oved is the word work. Yahu is God, Yahweh, the worker of God, or shorten it, Obadiah. And it says, Ahab called Obadiah, who was over the household. Obadiah feared the Lord greatly. So Obadiah is a believer. right? Can you see that in verse 3? Don't lose track now. He's a believer, but he's a timid believer. So verses 1 through 16 are about a timid believer, somebody who's afraid of the king but fears God. It's just that he fears the king more when he's in front of the king than he fears God when he's in front of the king, okay? So Ahab, knowing him to be a trustable guy, sends him out, and it says, for when Jezebel destroyed the prophets of the Lord, Obadiah took 100 prophets and hid them by 50s in a cave and provided them with bread and water. So Obadiah becomes like the raven of the earlier story. He's the guy who brings bread to prophets who are sitting in caves. And there's 2 caves on Mount Carmel, up in the area of Mount Carmel, where these guys are hiding, where the heavy, thick forests of Carmel are. His king doesn't know what he's doing, but he fears God. Ahab says to Obadiah, go through the land to all the springs of water and go to all the valleys. Perhaps we will find grass and keep the horses and mules alive and not have to kill some of the cattle. Now, they've been a long time without water. Do you remember I told you that when we looked at the kingdom or the landscape of Israel, that when you go further north on the map of Israel, color it more green. When you go further south, color it more brown. North and west is wet, south and east is dry, because south and east of Israel are the 2 greatest deserts, okay? But there's a second rule for rainfall. High is wet, low is dry. When you get 1,292 feet below sea level, you're at the Dead Sea, and it's dry, it's dead. When you get to Mount Carmel, when you're up above sea level, you have this nice towering mountain on the northwest corner of Israel. It means there's more natural rainfall that falls in that area than anywhere else in the country. So it has natural forests. What is its name? Carmel. Ooh, doesn't that sound good? Doesn't it just sound good? Carmel. Anyway, Karim is vineyard. El is God, vineyard of God. The thing you should know about a vineyard is you don't water it. You don't water a vineyard. You allow it to be naturally watered. So the vineyard of God, in the mind of the Hebrew, is the place that gets the most natural rainfall. Now, here they're walking around the sides of Mount Carmel. Why do you suppose Ahab chose Obadiah? I think he's the guy in charge of the forests of Mount Carmel. I think that's why. And the last place you're going to find a stream still flowing is the place that has the most natural water on it, Mount Carmel. So Ahab dispatches Obadiah. Obadiah is running around, and Obadiah has been coming up and down Mount Carmel to feed the guys in the caves on a daily basis, okay? So they divided the land, verse 6, between them to survey it. Ahab went one way by himself. Obadiah convinced him to go the way that the caves of the prophets weren't, and he took that half, and he went the other way, okay? You should kind of work with the story a little bit. Verse 7, Obadiah was on his way, and behold, Elijah met him. And he recognized him, and he fell on his face, and he said, is this you, Eliyahu, my master? Because Elijah is considered the prophet above prophets. Why? Because he shuts the water off. And so Obadiah says something in verse 9, and I'm wondering if you can catch why he says it. Oh no, what sin have I committed that you are giving your servant into the hand of Ahab to put me to death? Verse 8 says, Go tell Ahab that I'm here. And Obadiah's immediate reaction is, what did I do wrong? What do you mean, what did you do wrong? You have to understand, Elijah has this habit of making pronunciations and then disappearing. So Obadiah says, oh man, I've had a good life. I'm doing good stuff. You know what's going to happen? I'm going to go get Ahab. I'm going to bring him here. You're going to disappear, and I'm going to die. What did I do wrong? I pay my taxes. I feed prophets. What do you want from me? And Elijah's, no. Go get your master. I'm staying here. Verse 10, as the Lord your God lives, there is no nation or kingdom where my master has not sent to search for you. And when they said, he is not here, he made the kingdom or the nation swear that they could not find you. He says, my master's been looking for you like a hound dog. And now you're going to pop up and you're going to disappear and leave me stuck. So now you're saying, well, just go tell him, Elijah is here, behold. It will come about when I leave you that the Spirit of the Lord will carry you where I will not know. And when I come to tell Ahab he cannot find you, he will kill me, although I, your servant, have feared the Lord from my youth. You're sticking me in an impossible situation if you disappear. Has it not been told my master what I did when Jezebel killed the prophets of the Lord and hid 100 prophets of the Lord by 50s in caves and provided them with bread and water? And now you're saying, go, say to your master, behold, Elijah is here. Don't you get that this story is running on a little long? We're taking an awful long time for him to just go do what he's told. Why? Because Obadiah has lived in the circumstances without understanding the provision of the Lord. So he has become timid. In other words, he believes that the king is stronger than his God. He believes in his God, but he believes he's got to hide from that his king is so strong that his king can take over his life. And here's what I want you to know. You are indestructible until God is done with what you're doing. And the fact of the matter is he doesn't believe that. He believes he's up to the subject to the whims of Ahab. And now you are saying, go say to your master. Look at verse 15. Elijah said, as the Lord of hosts lives before whom I stand, I will surely show myself to him today. So Obadiah went to meet Ahab, and Ahab told him, and Ahab went to meet Elijah. So Obadiah becomes the first story, and it's about a timid believer. Make sure that somewhere in your notes, story number 1 is Elijah encounters a timid believer and has to buck up his faith. Where did he learn to do it? He learned it from the last chapter. He learned that God will provide. He learned that God is strong. He learned that God can provide from things that no one can see. But you got to have it before you can give it out. You will never give out a message you do not possess. So he has lived this message, and now he's ready to give. Now, go on to story number 2. This is 17 through 20, and this is meeting Ahab. If Obadiah is a timid believer, what is Ahab? He is either a non-believer or someone who's at least coming from, let's say, coming from a believing home or coming from a believing country background where he is turning away. He's a rebel. He's a mutinous, angry rebel against God, a stranger from God. And it's by his own choice, by his own admission. 17 to 20, somebody read it.
When Ahab saw Elijah, and Ahab said to him, is this you, you troubler of Israel? He said, I have not troubled Israel, but you and your father's house have, because you have forsaken the commandments of the Lord, and you have followed the Baals. Now, then send and gather to me all Israel at Mount Carmel, together with 450 prophets of Baal and 400 prophets of the Asherah, who eat at Jezebel's table. So Ahab sent a message among all the sons of Israel and brought the prophets together at Mount Carmel. Okay.
He basically comes in contact with Ahab, and you know what? One of the most important verses is one of the ones we just read. When Ahab saw Elijah, what did he say to him?
You're the cause of all this trouble.
Aren't you the causer of the trouble? See, it never occurs to the rebel that their rebellion is the cause of the problem. When my pastor retired after 50-some years in ministry, he was asked, what have you seen happen in ministry? He said, in the beginning, we were the answer, now we're the problem. We are living in days when you who know God will be framed as the problem for the nation, not the sin that's causing the trouble. That's what the problem is. Rebels misframe misfortune because the believers won't yield to the majority. Somehow, you not yielding to their point of view becomes you being intolerant. Isn't that interesting? But they can be utterly intolerant. And here's the thing, somebody can attack you meanly. And their basic point is Christians are mean. But if you have to be mean to say that the other person's mean, then your point is moot. Because you have already said meanness is okay in my hands, not in yours. Okay? Ultimately, what you see here is Ahab misframes it. Now, great story there, but we're not done yet. Story number 3, 21 to 35. This is prophets of Baal. They represent proud pagans from the University of Paganism, and they are thumping their drums and being all happy about it. We are pagans. Now, in 21, it says, Elijah came near to all the people and said, how long will you hesitate between two opinions? If the Lord is God, follow him. If Baal, follow him. But the people did not answer him a word. The people don't know where the power is. Now, Elijah has learned that God will provide. Elijah has learned to speak hard things to people who don't want to hear them. Elijah is standing in front of either 450 prophets of Baal and 400 Asherot prophets. That is 850 to 1. Or it's 450 prophets of Baal, and among them are the 400 prophets of Asherot, 450 to 1. Either way, the odds aren't great. Let's say that the guys came out of the caves and stood for God next to Elijah. It still would equal 101 to 850. The odds are not good. And what you have is Elijah comes out and says, why are you limping between two opinions? Now, when there was an altar found at Megiddo, one of the cities of the Canaanites, an excavation from the Canaanite period, they found that there was an altar that was round and it was like a cake, but halfway down the altar, there was a step around the altar, as if, and one of the stelae that we have suggests that maybe the way that they burned something on the altar, but they also put their leg up on the step and danced around the altar, and he plays with this, why are you limping between opinions? I think it's a play on words of what they're doing. But in addition to that, it says in verse 23, let them give us 2 oxen. Let them choose 1 ox for themselves, cut it up, place it on the wood, put no fire under it, and I will prepare the other ox, lay it under wood, and I will put a fire under it. I want you to remember this picture. Okay, if that's who they are, then let fire from heaven cook their meat. I want them to put the meat out, but no fire. You guys think you control? Fine. Let Baal strike the meat. You're running around saying everybody, Baal controls the weather? Fine. Give it a test. I'm ready to bring my weather. You bring yours. Remember, fire from heaven is the Hebrew way for saying lightning. So, fine. Feel free to, strike it with lightning. But nobody gets to light your sacrifice. So what happens? You call on the name of your God, verse 24, and I will call on the name of the Lord. And the God who answers by fire, he is God. Well, I want you to underline in verse 24, the God who answers by fire, he is God. All the people said, that's a good idea. Here's what they said. We agree that we're going to see who God really is. Now, would you do that? Would you have the guts to put God on the spot like that and say, God's going to show up and strike that camera? No, but you also didn't have the long ramping up of the preparation of God to tell you what he wanted you to do. There was a man who was a very strong atheist and a very, very agnostic and angry man, but he was very well thought of in the 20th century. He walked into an auditorium and he stood in front of the people and he said, I will prove to you there is no God. He said, if there is a God, strike me dead in the next minute. The room got very quiet. People became uncomfortable. The minute came and went, and he said, there you have it. There is no God. A seminary professor that was there stood up and said, well, we've learned something today. We've learned that God is not taking any cues from pagans. He doesn't have to take your orders. And if you want to be arrogant, be arrogant. You didn't prove anything but that you're arrogant. And the room left. I want you to see that it took real guts for Elijah to do what he's doing. He's outmanned, he's outgunned. The people aren't necessarily with him. They're sitting on the fence. And what you see is the proud pagans standing up. And here's the thing. They start, you know the story. I'm not going to read it line by line. What do? They put out their sacrifice. They dance around, oh, Baal, hear us, 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 oh, Baal, hear us. You are going to be shocked. You are going to be absolutely blown away. Baal doesn't hear. Why? Because there's no Baal. Now, one of the things that happens is, this is one of the, verse 27 is a verse you should put a little smiley face next to. It came about at noon, Elijah mocked them. and said, call out with a loud voice, for he is a god. Either he is occupied or gone aside. What the Hebrew says is he's sitting on the john. Perhaps he's in the bathroom and can't hear you. Here's what I can tell you. If you have 850 on their side and you are one, you don't make fun of them, do you? But you plus God is a majority, and Elijah knows what God is doing, and so he says, you might need to wake him up. Maybe he's on a john. Maybe he can't hear you. When midday was past, they raved until the time of the offering of the evening sacrifice. There was no voice, no answer. No one paid attention. Now, Elijah said, I want you all come back, gather around the altar, repair the altar of the Lord that had been torn down. And by the way, there was already a high place on Carmel. So he took them back to the high place that already existed. The Baalite altar was new. The Yahwist altar was old. Why is that important in the story?
Because they had tried to replace God with Baal.
Exactly. They got a new improved God and tried to replace him. Built a new thing, and we're going to have a new Israel, and it's going to all be about the new thing. And he took them back to the old one and said, set it back up and repair it. There's a reason. He's trying to repair them. Elijah then took 12 stones according to the number of the tribes of the sons of Jacob, to whom the word of the Lord had come, saying, Israel shall be your name. So with the stones he built an altar in the name of the Lord, made a trench around the altar, which is great. He made a trench around it. And he said, large enough to hold 2 measures of seed. And he arranged the wood and cut the ox in pieces, laid it on the wood. And he said, okay, put 4 pitchers of water, pour it on there. So they do it a second time, they do it a third time. Verse 35, the water flows down, fills up the trench. And now we have this moment of the fourth story. You had Obadiah, you had Ahab, you had prophets of Baal. The fourth one is God. It's Elijah and God. Elijah and Obadiah, Elijah and Ahab, Elijah and the prophets of Baal, and now Obadiah, and now Elijah and God. And he turns and offers what I would call a desperate prayer, okay? And it goes something like this. God, if you've ever thought about sending lightning, now would be a good time. Lord God, God of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, today let it be known that you are God in Israel, and that I am your servant, and I have done all these things at your word. That's important. Everything I've done up till now you told me to do. That's how we know that God instructed him exactly what he was going to do. Answer me, O Lord, answer me, that this people may know that you, O Lord, are God, and that you have turned their heart back again. See, he's not saying do this for me, he's saying do this for them. I need them to see you answer, and then I need them to surrender their heart to you, because they agreed that the God who answered by fire would be their God. Now I want to see you come through. Elijah calls out, and the fire of the Lord fell and consumed the burnt offering and the wood, the stones, and the dust. Interestingly enough, Mount Carmel is limestone. If you ever go out and lime a ball field, has anybody done that? Have you ever put lines on a ball field? You know that white stuff that you pour? Okay. If you look at the bag, it says flame retardant lime. Limestone will burn. And so they put a retardant in it so that no one lights the field on fire, because, you know, it would be a cool thing to see, you know, all the things burned into the grass, but it would ruin the sod. So what they do is they have flame retardant lime. Now, up on Mount Carmel is a very high quality limestone. The limestone is not something you would build a fireplace out of, okay? Because the dust itself will burn from the limestone. It says the lightning came down, it cooked the meat, it lapped up the water, and it burned the stones that were sitting on it. Why? What were the stones? What did they represent in the story according to the story? 12 tribes. If God just took a sign of Grace Church and fried it, what would Grace Church be thinking? He could have hit us, but that's the end of the line for us. We better get it right, because God is striking our sign and turning it into a post toasty. So we need to be careful here. When all the people saw it, what did they do? They fell on their faces. The Lord, He is God. The Lord, He is God. It sounded like this. The Lord, He is God. The Lord, He is God. They're on their face. Work with me, come on. Then Elijah said, seize the prophets of Baal and do not let one of them escape. And they cut them down and kill them all the way down to the Kishon River. I'm going to take you to a place and show you the story and show you where the Kishon River is. You can actually see it all today. And what I want you to see is, after that, God is going to answer with water. He's going to bring clouds. But the cloud will first look like the size of a man's hand. Up on Mount Carmel, you can see not only down to the Kishon River, but you can see the Mediterranean, and you can see the clouds coming in from the Mediterranean, from the sea, where normally the storms come in. And the last part of the story is, Elijah says to Ahab, go up, eat and drink, for there is the sound of the roar of a heavy shower. There's about to be a lot of water coming to a place near you. Ahab went up to eat and drink, but Elijah went up to the top of Mount Carmel. He crouched down on the earth, put his face between his knees. He said to his servant, go up now, look toward the sea. So he went up, he looked and said, there's nothing. And he said to him, go back. And he did it 7 times. Once again, this is Elijah laying down 3 times. This is Elijah telling the servant, do it again, do it again, do it again, 7 times. Why? Because he knows that God is going to do it. But God is in no hurry, and he has learned to wait. And then it says, it came about in the 7th time that he said, behold, a cloud as small as a man's hand is coming up from the sea. And he said, go up, say to Ahab, prepare your chariot, go down, so that the heavy shower does not stop you. You can't run a chariot across the Jezreel Valley after it rains, because the Jezreel Valley is made of a thick clay that when I walk across it during the rainy season, I grow by a foot. The mud sticks to the bottom of your shoes and you keep growing. It's very cool. If you're short, you'll really like it. It's a big problem for chariots, though. They get bogged down in the mud. They can't go anywhere. In a little while, the sky grew black with the clouds, and there was a heavy shower. Ahab rose and went to Jezreel. That's another city across the valley, about 15, 16 miles away. Then the hand of the Lord was on Elijah and girded up his loins and outran Ahab to Jezreel. Why? Because Ahab was in a chariot and Elijah was on foot. Now, it seems like the chariot should go faster, but not in the mud. So Elijah gets there and outruns him with God's strength. This isn't the end of the story. 17 was the preparation. 18 was the delivery of the message. 19 is the heart of the story.